We are missing our funding workshop this month due to the virus, so I decided to go ahead and shoot a video, hopefully providing some guidance or assistance with my current clients that have revocable trust. So now a lot of you may have a funding worksheet, I call it a little cheat sheet, that kind of gives you an idea of what is normally done with trust. Now these are just general suggestions. It may not fit your current situation or your beneficiary designations that you've set up. So if ever in doubt, definitely shoot me an email if you're a client of mine so that I can look at your trust and see the type of asset and distribution that you have. But when you have a trust, the idea with the trust is to make sure that we don't have a probate for the most part. A lot of clients create these revocable trusts to make that administration process faster for their successor trustee, and also make sure that assets are in this bucket. Well, the only way that those assets get titled, into that bucket is you making sure that you tell your financial institutions that you have a trust. So for example, checking and savings, we want to be owned by the trust. If you are an individual, you go into Citizens or Chase or Bank of America and you say, hey, I want my account to be owned by the trust, those banks are going to want some type of proof of your trust. So they'll ask you for the certificate of trust, which is a summary that we prepare for you. They may ask for certain pages of the trust. So when you go into these banks, definitely take in your binder so that the banks can receive the information they need in order to connect that account to the trust. Now most banks around here are pretty easy to deal with, meaning they'll retitle your account and it's done within a few minutes. There are a few banks that may not let you name the trust as the owner because they'll make you close the account. Well, a lot of times if that's what they're going to do, we tell you if it's your main checking account, don't close it, just name the trust as a beneficiary. Again, that's an exception that could happen based on the type of financial institution you're working with. So when you look at your trust, it just is a document that says, here's my trustee and this is who's getting my money, but we have to make sure that there's assets connected. So most of the time with real estate, the attorney is connecting the property to the trust. Now I can title real estate in Florida, meaning I can do the deeds, but if you have out-of-state property, you're going to want to make sure that those properties are designated to the trust through an attorney in the state that that real estate is located in. So when you look at that, when your deed, it should say the name of your trust is the owner. So again, when you look at the titling of your assets, it needs to say the trust. Now that's most of the time on your checking, your savings, your money markets, mutual funds, brokerage accounts. Usually we don't name the trust as the owner of life insurance policies. Typically life insurance policies will have, if you're married, the spouse is primary and then the trust as secondary. And you may say, well, I have beneficiaries on that. Well, the idea is to make sure that those beneficiary designations inside your trust will ultimately get the money, but by having that cash from the life insurance proceeds going into the trust, it's going to allow your successor trustee to use those funds to keep the property going if there's expenses that need to be covered. And then once the trustee knows all those expenses are covered, then they would transfer the assets to your beneficiaries. So my recommendation, if the beneficiaries are going to be the same as your trust, then I would name the trust as a beneficiary. If you're married, after spouse. If you're not married, then primary. Non-qualified annuities. Normally we name the spouse as the primary beneficiary if you're married, and the trust as secondary. Most of the time, you are not connecting retirement accounts, so IRAs, 401ks, SEPs, 403bs to a trust. There are a few exceptions to those, and those are exceptions that you would have discussed with me, meaning you're trying to control the IRA proceeds beyond the beneficiaries getting it immediately. Or maybe your beneficiaries are minors and we're trying to control it until they're adults. Maybe the beneficiaries on governmental assistance. So there are reasons why. It's just most clients are not naming the trust as a beneficiary of a qualified account. So usually on retirement accounts, we're going to say name spouse as the primary if you're married, and then name your kids or the individuals that you want receiving those retirement accounts. You would name those directly on the beneficiary form. Now with the other accounts, I'm going to say the same thing. You want to make sure that the accounts are connected to the trust. And a lot of times you'll have banks who will say, oh, well, you have beneficiaries on your checking account. There's no reason to name the trust as the owner. Well, I would disagree, because if your checking account is owned by the trust when you die, that account is going to stay open. So that's really great for the person that you named as successor trustee, because they're going to have access to that account as soon as they get a death certificate. So they'll be able to write checks. If you have automatic withdrawals on that account, it's still going to be there. So I prefer the trust be the owner of your checking account, because the trustee will have access immediately. If you're going to create the trust, definitely make it work for your benefit. And that is going to be, one, for the benefit of our successor trustees who are going to need funds to cover the expenses of the property, or just your last illness expenses, funeral expenses. So when you think about funding a trust, it's going to be different for each client. If they have, blended families, maybe you're trying to have some assets go in the trust and some go directly to your kids and not your spouse. So there are definitely some exceptions. But, in general, we want to connect assets to the trust. Either the trust is going to own the asset or the trust is going to be the beneficiary. Always feel free to contact me. Shoot me an email if you're a client. If you have a form you need some coaching on, shoot me an email, drop it off. We want to make sure that your trust works for you, meaning we don't have a probate, we don't have a delay when you pass away, and that transfer, that transition from you to that successor trustee when you die will be very smooth, and they'll be able to step in right away and start making the administration decisions that they need to make. So again, this is a really short funding workshop. I'm sorry we can't be together. Once this craziness is all over, we'll start back having our once-a-month funding workshops. But please feel free in the meantime, if you ever have questions on whether an asset should be owned by the trust or not, or maybe you're having an issue with the bank, definitely reach out to me. Email is going to be the fastest right now. We are working on a limited schedule and trying to reduce the amount of time we are in the office, but I am available by email. Hope everybody's staying safe, and I'll see you soon.